The dating committee is not likely to call the end of this for quite a while because they want to be sure. They don't want to go back and change it. Initial UI claims, though, are declining, and you can see that here. This is the path of unemployment insurance initial claims, and there's a marked decline in them. This is the 4-week moving average. This turns out to be quite a good coincident and even somewhat leading indicator of the end of a recession, so this is good news. You can see this also in 2 other sources of information, the Business Establishment database and the JOLTS, the Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey. So the BED is shown here in gold, and the JOLTS is shown here in blue. There's more of a lag with the BED, so it's not turning down yet. It's probably going to, we'll probably see more of a spike on that. But with the JOLTS, you can see that that layoffs and discharges have begun to decline. But hiring is still at a historic low with no revival yet. So we're losing jobs at a slower pace. We're not really beginning to add jobs yet. What does that mean for the shape of the recovery? Unemployment is likely to be over 8% well into 2012. That's 8% is high. Right? This suggests a jobless recovery for over, a year plus after GDP growth resumes. Jobs will probably shrink at a decreasing pace through the end of this year, and we start to get some slow growth in 2010. There are some risks to this, of course. There's no guarantee that that will happen. And some of the risks that people talk about is that we get some feedback from this unemployment back into the housing market, and that undermines the recovery in the housing market, right? So that the unemployment kills the nascent housing market recovery. The other risks are that the stimulus, that it will turn out that this stimulus is withdrawn too quickly. Getting that timing right is a challenge. Okay, if that happened, then consumption or investment could falter further. The financial market recovery also could falter. It looks like it's on track, but it's still, I'd say, it may be out of intensive care, but it's definitely still in the hospital, right? And so. And the problem there is that that would cut off funds for investment, which is needed for job creation. So why do we think that there will be a slow recovery? First of all, we've seen very high productivity growth. That's good for profits. You'll see very high profit margins in the next few months. Hopefully that will fund some expansion and create jobs. But what that means is the high productivity growth. The flip side of that is that employers are being very conservative about hiring workers. We've had a dramatic post-war record decline in hours worked during this recession. Employers are then going to be able to increase hours without adding workers. We have a banking crisis. Banking crisis means, in this context, that funds are not flowing to companies that want to make investments in the way that they would normally be. And we have a lot of structural changes. Let me go back to my spider chart and show you the difference between a quick recovery and a slow recovery. The quick recoveries you can see in this graph are 1981 and 1973. After the star, we had a little bit more decline in job losses, and then we saw pretty rapidly jobs starting to pick up again, if you follow the dotted lines. The 1990 and 2001 recessions, they had the same length and about the same job loss. So if you follow the lines coming out from them, you see that jobs continued to decline for a long time and didn't really start to pick up for a year, for the 1990 recession, and more than that for the 2001 recession. Okay, so which is it? And I would argue that that an important part of whether we're going to get a fast recovery or a slow recovery is whether the job losses are permanent or temporary. And by permanent, I don't mean that the U.S. will never have this many jobs again. What I mean is that the particular jobs that are lost don't come back, so that any other growth has to be someplace else to get us back up to the total jobs that we had before. And recessions mix structural changes, where jobs permanently leave a place, and cyclical adjustments where firms kind of slow down their activity and then pick up again when good times return. Okay, so you can, in your mind, be thinking of cyclical as temporary and structural as permanent in terms of job losses. But permanent in that special sense of permanent, that those particular jobs don't come back, rather than my meaning that we'll never, ever get jobs back again. So why does it matter? Well, just think about it within a firm. If a firm lays off some workers and they then go back to doing exactly what they were doing before, it's very easy for them to recall those workers to that job. The easiest case is if it's a temporary layoff, then they still have an attachment to that worker, and they just call them up and say, "Hey Joe, show up on Monday." All right. If, on the other hand, they've eliminated a shift or closed down a plant, then any growth is, that they're going to have is probably going to be a different location, different occupations, doing something differently. They've got to make the case to management that they need the slot. They have to go and find the worker, right? And the worker who was laid off from the old job has got to reevaluate where they live, what they do, who they're working for, so that and try and find some new slots. So a recovery from structural changes takes longer, and it's riskier for the workers and the firms. The last two recessions, 90 and 01 recessions, were heavily structural. We had more permanent job losses versus temporary layoffs, and we had more movement of jobs amongst industries. And there's some reasons why we think that happened, particularly incentives for managers to be thinking always about using any opportunity to improve their productivity, fewer constraints on their activities, less unionization, regulation, more availability of temps and outsourcing, and the fact that these were milder downturns, so there was less impact on fundamentally strong firms. Most of the impact were on firms that did need to make big changes. So which is it this time? Are we talking about more structural change or more cyclical change? Well, we've got two competing factors. One is that we know there have been these changes in HR practices and pressures on management. Newer recessions seem to be more structural. On the other hand, deeper recessions seem to be more cyclical because the more fundamentally strong firms are affected. So if we split the difference, we're going to come up with an answer of more of both. So I can take a quick look at what's happening to temporary layoffs. I showed you the blue line before, the civilian unemployment rate. If I focus on the unemployment rate only for workers on temporary layoff, you can see that in previous, the older recessions, we had big spikes in temporary layoffs. And when the recession was over, we had rapid declines in workers on temporary layoff, which contributed to the rapid declines in the unemployment rate as a whole. Right? The latest recessions don't have those big spikes in temporary layoffs. And the numbers that I have floating above there are the proportion of the increase in the total unemployment rate that's accounted for by the spike in temporary layoffs.